Recording in progress.
There we go. There we go. So, Ms. Hopa, welcome. Thank you for being a part of this historical moment that we're making here. Let me, my volume.
Thank you.
Okay, give me 2 seconds, everyone. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, I can.
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, welcome everyone to our fireside chat with Dr. Ronald Hall and Ms. Thando Hopa, Esquire. Before we begin the chat, I would like to share with you Ms. Hopa's background, her bio, and Ms. Hopa, if I get it wrong, get me. Okay. Okay, so to begin with, she is a fashion model, a diversity activist, advocate, and a cultural activist. She's used the powerful communicative influence of the media to campaign for inclusive representation and transformative social narratives. She's delivered lectures and or talks in schools, institutions, community-based NGOs, and internationally renowned platforms. Some of the platforms I'd like to mention are she's guest contributor for Facebook's Responsive Innovation Workshop, a talk with the Makers Conference, with Bloomberg LP, with Richard Branson's Businesses and Adventures. She was a contributor. Also at the Beauty Revolution Festival, the Renata Conference in Austria, working as an anti-racist on the anti-racism panel for Ontario government in Canada. And she was a speaker at the Sister Summit in Paris, not to mention the magazine covers, the articles. There is an excellent video. If you click Ms. profile on the Colorism Conference website, there's an outstanding article that she wrote, in addition to a video where she's giving an outstanding speech on people understanding diversity, inclusion, equity, and understanding how people with albinism in this world should be treated. And she advocates for them, and you do an amazing job. So Ms. Hopa, thank you and welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you once more. That was a beautiful introduction.
Thank
you. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, everyone in the audience, today we're going to have this fireside chat where we are going to be focusing in on, Dr. Hall and Ms. Hopa are going to be focusing in on albinism and how albinism is an issue we need to discuss and focus in on when we're talking about colorism, because we're talking again about skin color. So let me give you a brief overview before we begin. So according to the United Nations, albinism is a rare, non-contagious, genetically inherited condition, which occurs worldwide, regardless of race or ethnicity. It most commonly results in the lack of melanin pigment in the hair, skin, and eyes, causing vulnerability to sun exposure. Albinism is still profoundly misunderstood socially and medically. Now, in some parts of the world, the physical appearance of persons with albinism has been the basis of erroneous beliefs and myths influenced by superstitions, which foster the marginalization and social exclusion of people with albinism. Now, persons with albinism are a unique group whose human rights have generally gone unnoticed for centuries, resulting in them becoming victims of deeply engraved stigmas, discrimination, and violence across various countries. That is a quote directly from the United Nations. So, and I want to make sure that we're clear, we clarify the terms we use to describe people with albinism. We do not use the term albino. It is insulting. It is derogatory. It is not accepted. And we give you a little brief background on the term. The root word for albinism is albino, which means white person. In society, well, let me give you more historical background. Europeans used the term to describe Black Africans with white skin during the 17th century, and that is a quote from Ms. Hopa. So as we move forward with this fireside chat, when you pose questions, please remember that we use the term people, we say people with albinism. Okay, so having said that, let me share one more historical fact with you on albinism birth rates. In every country in the world, we see albinism occurring. In other countries, albinism occurs in 1 in 20,000 births. In Tanzania, out of 59 million people, about 30,000 Tanzanians have albinism. Having said that, so now we all have a brief historical background and understanding. Let's move forward and start this fireside chat. Okay, I would like to begin, Ms. Hopa, to ask you, what are the life experiences of a Black South African with albinism?
Good day, everybody. It's evening on my side, actually. Looking at the experiences of Black people with albinism in South Africa, it's actually a bit of a difficult question because I think that there's so much layer with regards to the cultural, political, and social experiences that we have. And I think the best way to begin it is that we have the Western sphere and then we have the African sphere. And with the Western sphere, we deal with the entire ideology and legacy of what the West considered normal versus abnormal. And then we deal with the African sphere with regards to what Africans, consider natural versus supernatural. And I think that that impacts us in several ways. It impacts us when it comes to education, employment, just relationships. So in some way, looking at that as a background, I also think that it has, I don't know if I'm going to say something that's somewhat controversial, but I think it has the same modes as a caste system. Because persons with albinism, due to their skin color, the narratives that are imposed upon them somewhat make them the lowest of their caste. So the narrative places them in a space of pollution. So if you're looking at the African background, it is, are you human or are you not human? If you are considered not human, the explanation is generally, are you a curse, or did some kind of witchcraft befall you in order for you to be in this position? So it makes social integration quite difficult. But again, context does matter because time and place become important. The first founder or the founder of the Albinism Association in South Africa, for instance, when she went into employment and she wanted to become a teacher, the community was adverse towards that. They said, we're not going to be taught by this woman. We're not going to allow our children to be taught by this woman. But the work that she's also done, and I think this is also quite important, that's why I say time and place become important, because the work she's also done has really assisted, and mostly us in urban areas, because when I went into employment, I did not have the same thing to deal with. But you do see the legacy of those ideas reflect in different ways. As I said, employment, education, but basically social integration does become compromised because of these narratives that are surrounding albinism.
Thank you. So the next question is posed to the both of you. How are the life experiences of Black South Africans with albinism living in South Africa, let's say unique or different? What unique challenges, what forms of discrimination do they have to deal with compared to the experiences of Black Americans with albinism living in the United States? And to clarify, I would ask Ms. Hopa to address Black South Africans and Dr. Hall to address the people, Black Americans with albinism in the United States.
Well, if I'm to go first, first I'd like to say that I may be interrupted in this presentation by way of a knock at the door. I'm expecting a delivery, so if I have to run away for a minute or two, I apologize. I don't think it'll happen, but usually, if anything can go wrong, it usually does go wrong when you least need it to be. One of the things that impressions that were made upon me in studying skin color over the years, or colorism over the years, is there's this notion of what I might refer to as the dark skin as disadvantage narrative. And again, the dictionaries, the experts describe dark skin as being a deficit, as if lighter complected persons don't have any kind of difficulties. And I began to read about the issue of albinism in Africa, and I have to say that I was almost traumatized by what I read. In certain tribes, a number of tribes in Tanzania, for example, if a child born with albinism, to rescue their future, they are placed at the gate of where cattle are stored. And if upon release of the cattle, the child is trampled and died, well, that ends it for that family. But if the child is trampled and lives, then it's acceptable for that child to be a member of the family. They'll probably be stigmatized, but they can at least live their lives. Persons with such lighter complexions are stigmatized. Some tribes will actually hunt persons with albinism to make trinkets out of their bones, potions out of their blood, as an age-old tradition. And no one in the world is talking about that. And I couldn't understand, how could this be? And I had the privilege of contacting an individual in the United States who is the head of an albinism organization, and I don't remember the name. But in our conversations, there were no specific measures taken to accommodate persons of African descent with albinism. They have a unique set of circumstances that differs significantly from Euro-Americans with albinism, but it's all but completely ignored. And I thought I might hear from this person again because I wanted to start a dialogue, maybe we could get something going. But that was maybe 2 months ago, and I get the impression that this person was irritated by my contacting her, but it's something that I am going to take it upon myself to be a part of a movement to rescue persons who are so characterized by albinism.
Thank you, Dr. Hall. Ms. Hopa?
I'm actually going to just take pen and paper because I tend to forget sometimes because there's so many points there. Now, maybe I'll speak about this later, but I also would really like us to explore, because I think that they're quite intimately linked, the idea of disability and the idea of color, but more within the African context. But looking at what Dr. Hall was saying, actually, because I had read his article, the Maasai tribe, what the Maasai tribe does, I had not known about, for instance. And I actually found out from the former independent expert of matters surrounding albinism, who deals with the enjoyment of rights of persons with albinism. She told me that the oldest person with albinism in the Maasai tribe is 50 years old. And that is because his father spoke against the tradition and resisted the tradition. And that's really, it's his father's advocacy that kept him alive. But I also wonder, and this is really, I mean, speculation, in that there are certain rhythms and patterns that occur in African societies regarding disability in general. And I think that this is also just something to kind of look into, because and a lot of these things came really from me digesting Dr. Hall's article, in that in African communities, I think the idea of disability it's not the same as the Western idea of disability. The Western idea of disability focuses a great deal on impairment. The African idea of disability, I think, focuses on something that is visibly irregular. So as much as certain tribes would kill babies with albinism at birth, they would also kill twins. They would also kill a baby born without legs. And I think that with regards to albinism, the impairment of people with albinism is not actually the reason why they're excluded from people in their society. So it's not the short-sightedness or the visual impairment that generally comes with albinism. It's not the skin's vulnerability to the sun that generally comes with albinism. It's not that excludes people from social participation. It's purely color. Color is, in essence, the root view of you being disabled. In other words, the narratives that will come with disability is, first of all, you're visibly irregular. And then the explanation that comes with it is something supernatural. There was some kind of divine intervention that is punitive on your body. So you are cursed, or whatever the case may be.
Okay.
So that's the first thing. I know that it kind of broadens the topic, but as I said, I think it's very complex. I think it's quite layered. And, you know, I have my experiences also somewhat contextualized, because when I grew up, you know, there are still terms to describe albinism. I also know that Dr. Hall goes into them. Ishawa, for instance, is curse. Inkau is a monkey. And at the same time, this is what complicates the situation. At the same time, so you may live, as Dr. Hall explains, that if a child lives through that entire issue of the cattle stampede, that child will probably be ostracized and still live with stigma. But you still have the issue of people with albinism having their body parts trafficked, and they would be mutilated because their body parts are supposed to bring luck. So on one hand, the skin color becomes commodified. The skin color is exploited. Then on the other hand, when you are alive and you're trying to live your life, you're experiencing all the stigma, you are bad luck, you're a curse. But then when you are brutally murdered for your body parts, then your skin color suddenly changes and it transforms in narrative and perspective. All of a sudden, you know, it has value. I can't explain the discrepancy. I don't understand it. But it definitely, that contradiction definitely is there. And just to go back to your question just a little bit and to broaden it, when I believe your question also asked about Black Americans with albinism, and I'd also like to maybe also add white people with albinism. And part of what I'm saying is conjecture, I have to say. I just have to make that disclaimer, but it's just some of the observations and experiences that I've had. Now, with Black Americans, you do see that there was a culture a long time ago in the United States of freak shows. And persons with albinism, both Black and white actually, we were part of freak shows that were forcibly taken. Mostly Black people were forcibly taken. Some people would, you know, be part of freak shows voluntarily, but that was not, it was a rare occurrence. But when it came to Black people, they'd be forcibly taken, most of them, into freak shows, and there would be that idea of an oddity, an oddity, an oddity. And I do believe, and I hope that, you know, as the Colorism conference grows, we'll be able to share and connect with each other in terms of experiences. But I have seen that in the psychology and the imagination of the West, albinism still has that legacy when you're looking at film, etc., of oddity, of something that is peculiar and some form of institutionalized otherness. I do think that those rhythms still do exist in the United States. And when I talk about white people with albinism, I think for us who are from communities of rich pigmentation or ethnicities of rich pigmentation, the contrast of color is clear at birth. So we experience albinism as a politic. The power dynamic of the society comes into place on what narratives are imposed on you. I think with white people, they experience it more as a diagnosis. So at the age of 8, 20, 25, 40, you may discover you have albinism because of certain impairments that come about. Perhaps you don't see properly. Perhaps, you've got nystagmus. And so you may find out that you have albinism at the age of 25. But with us, it's a different thing altogether. So I think, as I said, I think they experience it more as a diagnosis, and we experience it more as politics. I hope I'm explaining it properly, but yeah.
Yes, it is. Dr.
Well,
Hope.
my knowledge on this topic is very limited, and I say much of what I say from speculation, and I don't have a lot of empirical evidence to support my conclusions. But in comparing and contrasting the issue of light complexion among African Americans and Africans in Africa, it seems like, as Ms. Hope has indicated, that it's defined differently in Africa. It's taken to be a curse. It has ritual associated with rituals, and I would speculate that the longevity of this issue in Africa is much, much, much more extensive than what you have with African Americans in the US, because a lot of what we associate with the various skin colors came by way of slavery and those kinds of international crimes perpetrated by persons of countries of European descent. But what sparked my interest in this topic had to do with the fact that light skin is so celebrated in America, and the fact that we could have this contrast of the way light skin is perceived by way of albinism on the African continent, and no one was talking about this. I was confused by that fact.
Yeah.
If you are a person of African descent and you have a very light complexion, and I'm not certain where albinism plays in that context, but if you're a person with lighter complected features, and there's been research that's been done, I've collected evidence, done studies myself, there's been found to be statistical correlation between a person's skin color, the amount of money they earn, the amount of income, the type of job that they have, and the amount of education that they have. It's not a cause and effect relationship, but it's certainly a correlation. So the larger the population that you're testing, the more likely you're going to have the lighter complected persons making more money. Now, when you transfer that issue of skin color, lighter complexion to Africa, you get a total opposite effect. You're denigrated by being cursed, being stigmatized. I don't know what the average lifespan of a person with albinism, I think that's said it correctly, but I'm confident that they don't live a normal lifespan. And Ms. Hopa mentioned someone that lived to the age of 60. I would think a little bit that I know that is very, very unusual. And my objective in pursuing this topic, I'd like to bring this into the fold of the conversation that we've been having about colorism, because no one is talking about that. At least, maybe, I don't think many people are talking about this outside of Africa. And here you're supposed to have this grand academic structure here in the US, and we're supposed to be the seat of knowledge, which is dominated by a Eurocentric perspective, and nobody knows about it. So there is a distinct difference. African Americans who have albinism I don't perceive them to be, and I may be wrong, I don't perceive them to be as stigmatized, certainly not life-threatening, than what you have with persons with albinism on the African continent. And I'd also be curious to know, Ms. Hopa would know better than I, is there variation on this issue given the African country? And, I don't know how many, 25, 30 African countries. In South Africa, is it different from Tanzania? Is it different from Uganda, et cetera, or is it stigmatized and cursed throughout Africa?
I think that's a very deep question, and I'm going to do my best to answer it in the best way I know how, with regards to the limited knowledge that I even have. So as we were speaking now about the Maasai tribe, that's Kenya, that's Tanzania, that's very different from my culture. And again, it goes back to time and place, because I've been reading several kinds of colonial literature regarding Black albinism in particular, and you'd see that it translated in different ways in different communities. But there was one thing that was homogeneous, is that each society intuitively was trying to explain the color contrast. So in some societies, you'd find that persons with albinism had high status. They'd be priests or whatever the case may be. In some societies, they had a very, very low status, and they were said to live in caves, etc. But of course, this is colonial literature, so you have to take it with a pinch of salt. But it does give you some kind of guideline or perspective. And one thing is for sure is that different communities were understanding albinism or translating albinism into their culture differently. Something happened that made the understanding of albinism somewhat constant over African communities. And I don't know what that is, but the severity is it's not the same. Now, in South Africa, there were killings of persons with albinism, but to be honest, in comparison to Malawi or Tanzania, really it's a very drastic difference. That occurrence was happening more in the minority in South Africa than it was in places like Tanzania and Malawi. And also, I don't know what happened in 2008, but something really sparked the Muti killings. Muti is medicine, sparked the medicine killings or ritual killings of persons with albinism. And I'm not sure, we're not really quite sure what exacerbated it, but after that, it just spread like wildfire. And it spread with very little consequence at the time, until an incredible woman, I see her as a sister and as a pathfinder. She's from Nigeria, Ike Ero, and she became the first independent expert of the enjoyment of rights of persons with albinism. I always get this wrong because they're very long. It's a very long sentence. But basically what she did is she consolidated everyone from media, education, law, all of us. She consolidated us to basically move towards action plans that are local for each country to ensure the safety, security, and mobility of persons with albinism. And Dr. Calbreth, I noticed that you also showed the stats and the results of how many people were murdered in Tanzania in 2015. If you go down to 2017, 2018, you'll see that that has significantly reduced because of the policies and the interventions that this woman has put in place. So I think, in platforms like this, when we are able to give flowers, we give flowers. And I think that, Ike Ero is a woman who definitely deserves her flowers. So there definitely has been change, but I think the more solidarity that we have from people like you, including you, Dr. Hall, who actually went and tried to bring this more into the American community for them to understand the depths of difficulties and discrimination and oppression that comes with persons with albinism in places like the African continent, I think we'll definitely do much better. But I think there has been some kind of progress. But with regards to light skin, as much as albinism has its consequence, which is very negative, and as I said, I actually think that we probably are of a lower status than very dark-skinned people in terms of caste. But we are also a colonized continent. So if you are very light-skinned, but if you're still brown, then you are actually of a high status. It's just that it's almost like there's a cap of color, and we are on the side where we are not black in any of its permissible shades. But if you're very light skinned, I think that all the statistics that you find in terms of advantage or favorableness in terms of employment, in terms of the economy, you would probably find that the same translates with us if you're light skinned but still brown.
So are you suggesting in Africa then your light skin by way of albinism is an advantage in getting employment or a disadvantage?
When it comes to albinism, it is a disadvantage. It is definitely a disadvantage.
Because it's recognized as a
Even with
diagnosis.
Yes, that's why I say, you know, we have the Western and the African perspective.
Yes.
So we are still viewed in the framework, in terms of the Western framework, as disease. And that follows a lot of the issues that come with disability. So people think that you are incapable of doing things, for instance. You know, you're not competent, you're not able to do things by yourself. All of those now reflect within the patterns of disability in the Western world. So I can relate a lot to a person who's in a wheelchair because the patterns of our lives will have a lot of similarities. So with regards to employment or another thing that happens actually is, you know, we complain a great deal of the time when it comes to diversity that companies are constantly looking at quotas. So because albinism, and also because of the work of IKERO and the United Nations and her mandate, albinism is now recognized as a disability in order for it to access the rights and the infrastructure that come with issues of disability, when initially we did not have that. For instance, I'm legally blind, I cannot get a driver's license. So that obviously restricts even my employment opportunities. And if I am not seen, or as if I'm not viewed in the law at least as disabled, then I am unable to access any rights to advocate for myself and my social and economic mobility. But the problem now with that is that you find companies who place persons with albinism in learnership. So you're not really in employment, but the data says that that company has gone through some kind of affirmative action because they've got people with disabilities who they gave jobs to, but they give them menial jobs that are not really jobs. And then you say, oh, I've empowered people with disabilities because you've empowered people with albinism, but you actually, in reality, you have not. But the data shows something that is advantageous to the company. So you're experiencing all of these issues where there's actually a restriction in moving in employment, but you know, the data could show you something else, but the reality is definitely very different for persons with albinism. But if I was probably 3 shades darker, meaning a light brown black person, it would be a very different experience for me. I wouldn't struggle as much in the spaces of employment or getting into more economic mobility.
Okay, so from what I understand, then, if your light skin comes by way of a natural familial phenomenon versus light skin that comes by way of a diagnosis, it's an advantage in one instance and a disadvantage in a diagnosis instance. But that caused me to be further confused when I compare and contrast with the U.S. African Americans in the U.S. and Africans in Africa with this notion of bleaching creams. Now, I'm sure you're probably familiar with bleaching creams, and that seems to be a contradiction to the diagnoses. What I read about some of the literature on the bleaching creams, that's a multi-billion-dollar industry. And there are African women who will use these bleaching cream products, which contain toxic substances like mercury or hydroquinone, which is a carcinogen, but they will use these creams to get lighter complexion, even though they may threaten their own physical health. And if they're pregnant, it will threaten the physical health or may possibly result in a stillbirth. So there's this contrast in one instance that if you are a person of with albinism, you're going to be denigrated. You're going to be considered cursed. You're actually, what I've read, you actually can be hunted, like you might hunt a deer or some animal to make various trinkets. But if you're light skinned by way of something other than a diagnosis, I'm assuming that it may be an advantage in Africa, but Johannesburg, the same way it's an advantage in the US, unless it comes by way of an albinism diagnosis. And that's
Correct.
confusing contradiction.
Well, I think that albinism it's a diagnosis, and you have people in the minority. It's not profitable.
Oh,
I think, beauty by making yourself lighter. There's an entire industry that wants that to work. So I think probably that's part of the factors of why you'd have that discrepancy. So yeah.
and one thing I wanted to mention also, that in jogging my memory, obviously there's a level of discrimination that persons with albinism experience that the general population doesn't experience. And I think maybe in a policy area, this should come under the guise of affirmative action. Now, I don't know if you have affirmative action in South Africa, but obviously individuals of such diagnoses are discriminated against. So policies, law should reflect, compensate for that. And if that's not addressed, that's an idea for some work to do.
So I think in essence, albinism is reflected in terms of disability mostly. I think that
Okay.
is, and I think this is also the difficulty, because how you don't really have data that goes into the specificity of the persons with disability that you have. So again, if you're trying to see whether affirmative action policies regarding disability do translate into the lives of persons with albinism positively, it's very difficult because the data is very broad and vague. It just says disability. So, and I always believe that if you don't have data that is very specific to certain groups, you don't really have representation. So it's difficult to really know whether the specific measures you're putting in are truly translating, because there's just that absence in data.
Well, as I said in some of the other sessions that I've had, I come to learn as much as I come to speak. And I wanted to pose the question to you, Ms. Hopa. Does this affect women differently versus how it affects men in the way society treats such persons with albinism?
I think that I'll give you an example of an experience. I don't know. The answer is I don't know. I'm not too sure. But what I realized is that women with albinism are generally, in some instances, non-gendered. I don't know if I can put that. It can put it in that way, because when there are whatever kinds of violences regarding women, for instance, in South Africa, so gender-based violence is it's a very politically loud issue in South Africa. And you had an issue where a woman who has albinism was mutilated by her partner, and she doesn't have the viewpoint or the perspective or the intersection of female in her. So when people are talking about femicide, they don't include that woman. They'll include her in ritual killings, So when people are talking about ritual killings in general, then that woman will be seen. But when when activists are looking to, do whatever work regarding femicide, they don't see her. And I found that very interesting. Even if a brown person is killed because of a ritual killing, if you're a woman, they will still see it as a femicide. But as soon as you have albinism, it is no longer seen within the framework of femicide, simply ritual killing. So there's something about, I don't know how to explain it, but I don't know if you can say defeminizing. I don't know if that is even a word, but there is that not seeing the person or embodying them within their full experience and humanity. But also you find that, for instance, with issues of gender-based violence, when women have to go to police stations and report an issue, they find it quite difficult to do so because one of the things is they're worried that they're going to firstly face stigma. And then it actually prevents them from reporting certain issues because they don't feel like they will be received fully and respectfully when they go and report. But also, there was an NGO that explained that women feel like they are more targeted in relationships because of their albinism, because you're, in essence, if you are mistreated, because your skin is devalued, nobody will really stand up for you. So you become more vulnerable to people who have toxic masculine behaviors. Yeah, so, I don't know if I'm answering your question. Part of it is, as I said, it's just bits of information that I've had by working with people. But yeah, to a certain extent, I would say that perhaps, yes, perhaps there is a difference. Mm.
Okay. Thank you both. That was really good. Here's a question that you probably touched on this, which I think you have, the both of you. But can you describe or explain the psychological, emotional, physical impact when people with albinism are treated disparately in South Africa? How does that impact your life, your goals, who you are, and how you move within society?
I can start out very briefly and comparing and contrasting. One of the psychological issues that lighter complected African Americans have is not being accepted by the group as authentic. I would wonder, are persons with albinism in Africa are accepted as less or rejected as less African because of their diagnoses? Being in America, and one of the reasons why I pursued this line of thought is because you have this notion in America, it's the dark-skinned disadvantaged narrative. And I want to bring to the world, to the colorism audience, there are issues that persons with lighter complexions, albinism, have that is just as oppressive, just as psychologically denigrating, but it's dismissed as if it's insignificant because we only pay attention to the dark skin as disadvantaged narrative. And I'm the first to tell you that there's disadvantages to be had for an African American with dark skin, but there's a disadvantages in psychological traumas that are to be had by persons who are lighter complexion as well. So does the African population at large reject persons as being less African because they have this diagnosis?
I would say not exactly. I think that they reject them as being less human, and I'll tell you why. I'll tell you what I think the difference is. When you have albinism, you have certain words that apply to you. For instance, in Sesotho, you'll be called Leswafi. Leswafi is something that is washed out. But usually, if you have the prefix le, it is derogatory. So, for instance, if I talk about a colored person, I will say Mutwa Mala. Mo shows humanness, Musadi, woman, Mu, Munna, man, But as soon as you start saying le, it shows something that is below. Now, the reason why I'm saying that is because there is a different term for people with albinism and a different attitude for people with albinism versus white people, for instance, who are generally considered much, who are on a higher status. So I think that because there is that differentiation, I think that they definitely know that you are African and they definitely treat you as African, just as a lower African.
Okay.
I don't think that, in the United States, it's one of those spaces, not even just United States or Europe, that is where my race generally comes into question. People ask me a lot on, do I see myself black or white? But that conversation is not really the prevalent conversation in an African context. It goes more into, are you human or are you supernatural? Some, like, the myths are, do you die, for instance? Those are generally the framework, but they certainly know that you are African and you are accepted as African because of the way you're treated. You're just accepted as the lowest of the African, as the lowest of your caste. So I don't think that there is that. I don't think our bodies are handled with suspicion on whether we are African or not, but they're handled with suspicion on whether we're human or not.
Okay,
I don't know
so
if
the
I'm.
turn to flip that over, if you are less
Mm,
or lower as an African because of albinism, lighter
mm,
skin, are you
mm.
considered higher as an African because you have the darker skin? Is there a gradation that benefits persons who are the darkest complexion?
So I actually don't think that African communities were generally. I think that's more of a racialized view. So in other words, if you're dark, it's just the reverse. If you're dark, you'd be in a higher status. I don't think that's what happened. In fact, if
Oh,
you're looking at a lot of African literature, poems, or oral literatures that were old, you realize that skin color is not at all what we understand it to be today. You could actually almost say it was neutral. But albinism was something that was deeply irregular. So the contrast was explained more, I think, through the lens of disability than through the lens of racialization. So so I don't think that it was a hierarchy of color, but it was a hierarchy of what is regular versus what is irregular in our societies. I hope I'm
okay.
I hope I'm making sense. Yeah.
So then that would lead me also then to ask, similar to what goes on in the US, is there gradations of acceptance among African countries based on your skin color? So are the countries that have a darker complected population, are they denigrated more or less? Some of the literature that I've read also, there seems to be something going on with those more Arab African countries, like Egypt, for example. Skin color gradations may make more of a difference there than some other African countries. I don't know that to be a fact, but I'm curious as to what you would think about that.
Now, okay, I'm not sure. I'll be honest, I'm not sure. But as I said, it goes back to time and place. With regards to albinism, there has been a difference in treatment. And I will tell you,
Hmm.
for instance, there was a Sangoma is a traditional healer. It is somebody who's considered to have a gift of I don't know, so let me say a medical intuitive in some sense. But they also generally converse with ancestors, etc. Now, the person who found Chief Magoma, Jogum Sobomvu, Magoma was a very famous and powerful Xhosa chief. And the person who had actually found his bones was a woman with albinism, and she's
Hmm.
considered a very powerful seer. But anyone can be a seer, but it is a position of status. So it
Hmm.
doesn't matter whether you're dark skinned, you're light skinned, you've got albinism, anyone can be a seer. But right now, to find a seer who has albinism is rare because somehow the superstitions sparked and the
Hmm.
issues regarding albinism sparked. And I don't know what has caused that. So you will not find people with albinism being seers. It would be a very rare occurrence
Hmm.
because the superstition has definitely has injured the status of people with albinism within their communities further.
Hmm.
Um, so I guess again it goes back to time and place. So I'm Xhosa, but I can tell you that that woman's status is definitely higher than mine, even though she was alive
Hmm.
maybe 60, 70, 80 years ago. I don't like
Hmm.
a very long time ago. Um, but yeah, but Chief my grandma died, geez, a long time ago. I can't tell you exactly when, but she found him several years later because she was considered to have that intuition and gift. But to be a priestess of some kind, that is status, and I think that has changed. So yeah. Mm.
Well, again, comparing and contrasting, in the US, you have a correlation between skin color and morality and ethics. There have been studies that have been done. African American women who have been in prison, for example, committing the same crime as a darker complected African American women will get a much lighter sentence. And I understand that in Africa, with the issue of albinism, I was wondering, it's a diagnosis. Are there any ethical or moral implications interacting with the police, for example? Are persons with albinism considered more aggressive or more violent, or some of the other negative stereotypes that skin color may apply in the U.S.? Or are they treated the same as darker complected Africans?
Actually not. So again, albinism takes the same frameworks as disability. We are considered absolutely non-threatening, weak. So another issue actually would be that a man with albinism would have to fight off the stereotype or perception that he is weaker than other men.
Okay.
He's seen as a person who's not going to be able to hold together a family, really not worth the same status as a dark-skinned man, even, you know. So we follow a lot of patterns that are similar to other people with disabilities. Yeah, I hope I'm making sense.
Yes, because that, again, jogs my memory to another fact, comparing contrasting with the US. In the US, lighter skinned men are not considered as manly, as masculine, as strong as darker skinned men. And I've done studies with athletes, and athletes will admit that in articles that I've read. So there's an association with darker complexion and masculinity versus the diagnoses that you have inside. So there's a commonality there, I think. But the flip side of that question is that a similar association with femininity. Darker skinned women considered less feminine, and lighter skinned women, even with the diagnoses, considered more feminine, more passive, less aggressive.
I would say yes. I would say yes. I think that, I would note how, for instance, I am explained. So for instance, sometimes I would, and I think it is the intersection of being a woman and having albinism. I would explain something, or I would ask a question and I would listen to the answer. And if I'm asking a question about whatever, what initiatives can we place with regards to education to ensure that there's more inclusive education regarding persons with albinism? And I've had people answer, what I think is really important about what you're saying is empathy. I think, you come from a place where you're speaking about empathy. I think to myself, what just happened? I'm asking for practical solutions and you're looking at somewhat soft skills. And I think that it kind of goes into that rhythm that you're not really listening to what I'm saying, but you're in fact looking at characteristics that I don't even think I'm displaying at this point in time. But because of what you see, you're responding more to what you see. You're not actually listening to me. So I do think that those rhythms do play a part to say, well, I'm lighter skinned, I'm less threatening. And it's actually quite interesting just to look at the contrast of skin color and space. And so, my husband, for instance, is a very dark skinned man. Well, I don't know, people may say very dark skinned is relative, but when he's in South Africa, he, especially when we're moving in places like townships, etc., places that are dominated by Black people, he inherently sort of holds some kind of status. And I almost don't. And I remember that there was a time when we were planning a trip to the United States, and I was looking at the things he was packing, and I was like, I don't know if you should pack a hoodie, which is interesting because in South Africa, he's worried about certain spaces on whether I will attract harm or injury or threat, but he doesn't really worry about himself. We move into the United States where I've never been stopped by anybody. I go through the airport just fine. I don't have any real issues. But all of a sudden our context changes and we're very aware of each other's skin color. So I know that his status there and the threats that he could attract, they are much higher in the United States than in South Africa, just based on his color. And he knows that the threats that I could access here are much higher than in the United States. So it's just interesting, yeah.
Well, maybe Dr. Colbert wants to take a few questions from the audience. If not, I have a couple of comments, questions.
Well, first question, let me give accessibilities to the audience so they can ask questions.
Well, while we're waiting, at the risk of getting too personal, and only share with us what you feel comfortable with, Ms. Hopa, you seem to be an exception. You are educated, you're a celebrity. How did you get to where you are with all the challenges that you might have had?
So I think also is that it's a lot of context in everybody's experience. So a lot of the times we're generalizing, but I come from, my father was an engineer, my mother a filmmaker. So already that kind of moves you into a certain class stratification or access to things that you would not usually get, more so
Okay.
from people who were coming from apartheid South Africa.
Okay.
Having a Black engineer at the time was already rare, but I think that already as my family loved me entirely, completely. And the only time I actually started understanding these social ideologies of albinism was more when I went out of the sanctum of family. So there's that. But then, of course, I was not immune from all the issues regarding albinism and what society's perceptions are with regards to my body. But I think going to certain spaces, certain schools, it mitigated the access that I had to all of that. But again, time and activism, the activism of Mam Nomasondo, who used to knock on every door to find out which child has albinism in this house. Do you know what albinism is? Let me teach you about all of that impacted. So the work of activists impacted my life. So yeah, I think it was just kind of a myriad of things that just came into play that did not make me feel the full force of what I could have experienced in a different situation.
Okay.
Miss, go ahead, Dr. Hall.
Oh, I was going to ask if we're ready for a few questions that were.
Yes. Yes, Miss Jefferson, you can pose your question.
Thank you. Hello, Ms. Hopa.
Hi, Ms. Jefferson, how are you?
It's a pleasure listening to this whole conversation. And I was just wondering if you could speak a little bit to your experience in just the high fashion industry, just in general, how I guess it makes me think of a lot of aspects of how critical that can be just in fashion, in terms of colorism, in terms of size, in terms of race, all those dynamics that come into play, how that's impacted your involvement in that environment.
Okay, so I don't know if you want to take all questions or can I just respond to her immediately? Dr. Culbert, should I just respond immediately?
Yes.
All right, okay.
Yes.
So in the fashion industry, I think the intersection has been wild. And I'll just explain to you how interesting the narrative is. For instance, you know, the blue-eyed, blonde-haired stereotype. When you read about that, it's generally narrated as the beauty ideal. But as soon as you put a Black person or a person of color in that context of blue eyes and blonde hair, it's narrated with the narrative of disease. So what I found so interesting is how, as opposed to, okay, I apologize, that is a power cut. So that happens in South Africa sometimes. We have power cuts, apologies.
Mhm.
What was I? Okay, so I think this is the interesting thing, is that I would be in an interview that would be discussing fashion and lifestyle and my favorite lipsticks, etc. But obviously taking into consideration just my life story. And the article would come back as if I am reading a medical article. It will talk about, so Thando Hopa is a woman with albinism. Albinism is a genetic disorder that is inherited, etc. This is in the article where I understood the interview to be about fashion and lifestyle. So there was that constant, affirming of you are a condition, you are a condition, you are a condition. And a condition is actually more a neutral term, but you are a disorder or disease, almost like there was a constant need to explain why we're speaking to this person, why are we speaking to this woman? And we're speaking to this woman because there's a charitable outlook on why we are featuring her in this platform. And I think that happened so often, but right now I do see that it is decelerating. It's not happening at the same rate that it used to happen. And another thing is, I was somewhat unnamed because for about maybe 2 to 3 years of my modeling career, headlines would only say albino model. They wouldn't actually name me as Thando Hopa. So the person was definitely placed at the periphery and the condition was primary. And to be honest with you, I mean, I don't think that albinism is a disease. I don't think it is a disorder. I see it as a biological phenomenon where people are, or people's bodies are presented as lighter than what is anticipated within their ethnic group. But I think because there's a long racial history regarding albinism, we are left with the consequences of albinism being viewed or narrated. And it's got the backing of science, which is not actually true, but it's got the backing of science to say it is a disease, it is a disorder. But you actually see that it's a racialized history. That's a story for another colorism conference. But yeah, so it's just I've had quite interesting experiences in the fashion industry.
Yes, Simran.
Hi, thank you so much, Sopa. I truly appreciate your insights, and I'm not going to speak for long because I too have load shedding, but I just wanted to, yeah, it's a South African problem.
She knows.
So I'm absolutely not turning on my video because I am in complete darkness, but I just wanted to say thank you for bringing up the fact that the mutilations and murders of people with albinism is not actually considered femicide, especially of women with albinism. So thank you so much for that. I do have a little bit of a question. Do you think our decolonization processes and policies can help with that, to try to include women with albinism in our femicide statistics and policies? Thank you so much.
Can I ask you to elaborate on that, or at least give me a reference when you're talking about our decolonization policies? So for instance, if you give me a reference of something like health or land, because I know that's a very big topic. But I'll start as a precursor, and then you let me know if I'm answering your question properly. But I think for me, the more, when Kimberly Crenshaw brought in the framework, the analytical framework of intersectionality, I think that is part of decolonization, because you are then able to look at people within their social constructs, but holistically. And I think if you're looking at something, when you see somebody like the work that the United Nations has done to firstly view the discrimination that is faced by persons with albinism through the lens of color, so racial discrimination based on color, and also view albinism as a disability, it does help the body of albinism amass more power in law and institutions, because then you obviously have more access to rights. And as we know that our constitution does not allow you to discriminate based on color and on race. So race is one aspect and color is another aspect. So albinism is seen in both avenues of discrimination, which initially it wasn't really. And I think that it actually took the innovation of activists or minds of activists who are in different spaces. And in this space, it was a legal activist who was in the UN. And her imagination could allow her to be innovative enough to see all of these avenues on which tools you can use to empower the body of albinism to have more rights. But yeah, I think the intersectional approach is one way you can allow people to be received fully within institutions and structures as you're giving them social mobility through rights. I hope I'm making sense.
Mhm.
Is she still there, or
Thank you.
did we lose her to load shedding? Because that also happens.
Would
I'm
anybody
so,
else like?
oh,
Go
so
ahead.
sorry. Just want to say thank you. That answers my question perfectly. Thank you so much.
Does anyone else like to pose a question or have a comment? I just shared a link to an article about Ms. Hopa for you to read. And my question I wanted to pose to you is, what can we do in the United States to support people with albinism in South Africa?
And if I could just begin that discussion or that commentary by suggesting Ms. Hopa, I think you would make an excellent international spokesperson for persons with albinism, intelligent, attractive, articulate. I think you would be significant in bringing this issue front and center worldwide, which is where it really needs to be. So you got a job ahead of you.
That's right.
Well, thank you. But I think it's a bit difficult to say, and I'll tell you why. Because people with albinism, more so in the African continent, are already doing the work. What they've done in the past couple of years is actually amazing. It's incredible. You've got the African Albinism Network now. The Global Albinism Alliance got formed, and all of these things are to place political pressure, because when you have alliances that are especially of a global nature, generally their main I don't know what the word is, but the power that they have is to say, if you are doing some kind of transgressions, know that this person is not alone. Whether this person has to face the victim of a ritual killing, etc. It is basically saying that there is solidarity amongst persons with albinism all around the world, and we're speaking as a global voice. So I think in terms of that, there has really been a great deal of progress. But I guess because I have a media bias, I generally always go to that, because that is also the fraternity I'm in. But I think one of the things that really help is exposure and telling and showing different narratives regarding albinism, because I think that is one of the ways we can have a more human inspired approach, seeing people with albinism in different backgrounds, and not just elite backgrounds, not just when they're doing very, very well, but also in difficult situations, but speak about their stories holistically, but have as many stories out there as possible, because in that way we'll have a more human inspired approach, and we can see like the full length of the experiences of persons with albinism. But I think, apart from that, it's difficult to say, because I have to say persons with albinism are doing the work. Almost every country in Africa has a task force that focuses on everything regarding albinism. It's led by people with albinism. It's formed by people with albinism. And yeah, man, I can't, I can't really say, I don't know what to actually say in terms of assistance because they are doing the work.
Excellent. Dr. Hall, how can we bring light of it here in this country?
I didn't hear you.
Can we bring light to the experiences of people with albinism in South Africa and other parts of Africa here in the US?
I was going to say that Ms. Hopa mentioned the work that Africans are doing regarding persons with albinism. Then I really kind of think it's shameful, but the issue is almost all but non-existent here in the US. I think we need to be activists, conferences like what we're having today. I think this may be the introduction of this issue to people who had never even known that it existed. But I also had a question in my mind about, you're familiar in South Africa with coloreds. And I
Yes.
perceive coloreds to be not diagnosed, but they are lighter skinned Africans. And what I've read, they don't particularly associate with darker skinned Africans. What
Yes.
kind of relationship interaction do you have as a person of albinism with the colored population, assuming you have people you know that are coloreds?
So I think it's very interesting because the colored community was designated as a race quite intentionally in apartheid South Africa because, and I think Trevor Noah explains this very well, is that white people were a minority in South Africa as opposed to, I don't know if I could say they were a minority when they actually invaded the United States, but they definitely did not have the numbers in South Africa by far. So they didn't want to explain or perceive biracial people as Black because that would add to the numbers. So they created a different group, which was colored, to ensure that you're not actually increasing the population of the Black community. And what they did is they assigned different privileges to colored communities than Black communities. And because colored communities were considered to have somewhat white blood, for lack of a better word, they were given more privileges. But again, it was a strategically divisive move to ensure that there is no solidarity to increase the population of the race that you have now termed as Black. So in terms of that, I think that history still endures. I think that division is still there, but you do find a higher level of consciousness with regards to us integrating with one another because we know that our history has hurt us. So I do think that there's a consciousness to try and integrate more, but we do still have the issues of we are two different races, even though that is entirely mythical or entirely constructed. But yeah, that reality still does exist.
Well, that's very informative and very enlightening because you're saying that essentially any disassociation between coloreds and unadulterated Black Africans is not just about colorism. That was an institutionalized arrangement to keep, it's divide and conquer, essentially. We have the similar situation going on here in America where there's been attempts to separate Black voting districts so that African Americans couldn't empower themselves by way of congressional representatives.
That's interesting.
Interesting.
Can I just get back to Dr. Culpeth, because now I actually have thought of certain ways where you could assist.
Okay.
And I think that, giving persons with albinism more spaces in institutions where they can help solve their own problems. And I think, one of the things that I feel is there is really the literature regarding albinism, especially from people with albinism, is extremely underrepresented. And I think that we need to be able to have spaces where we control the narrative, because the narrative has been controlled for us for a very long time, more so being a significant minority, it becomes quite difficult to be in spaces where you can control the narrative that impacts bodies of people who are like you. So I think that's just kind of one of those things. And the second thing is it's all about economics. So when there are institutions, organizations that are focused on the social and economic mobility of people with albinism, more so people of color, safety of persons with albinism, help with the economics, because that makes it easier to have agency over how things are done. So yes, that's what I would say.
Okay.
Well,
We will definitely.
I mentioned just jogging my memory again. I'm getting all of these ideas. I don't want to propose more work, but Miss Hopa, you need to write a book. And I don't know if you could give us any titles that would educate us about this issue, but I think you need to write a book with the platform that you have, talking about economics.
Mhm.
Thank you. I will
Definitely.
I'll take that to heart.
You should. And I think one way we can also use our platform here is to actually host an event where we invite people with albinism to come and share and listen to their narratives, their stories, their experiences, and link together. I think that would be phenomenal as well. But we definitely want this book.
Yes, and you already have a head start because you're now associated with the Colorism Project under Dr. Colbert. So you got a head start.
That's right.
Indeed so. Indeed so.
One point, Miss Arthur, Professor Arthur, if you're still here, yes, she made a point of how she's going to. Well, I'll let you share your story. Go ahead, if you can. I think I gave you access.
I can. I teach in a semi-rural community college setting. And I have to tell you that this has been so enlightening just for me to hear your story and to learn so much from you and Dr. Hall as well. But for me, this is something that I intend to include in my curriculum, because imagine someone like me who's been, studying sociology for 25, 30 years. This is so new to me. I can't imagine that really many of my students are familiar with it. And I do inherently believe that exposure to these narratives is the way that we move forward as societies. So I do intend on including your story in my curriculum this upcoming semester and moving forward.
That's wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to add something to what Professor Arthur just mentioned. I'm a sociologist. I was a trained sociologist, got a bachelor's, master's in sociology, and that's where I learned more about colorism. That's where I wrote my master's thesis on colorism. I think that the discussion on colorism does exist, but it also becomes one of those discussions that in the US is not so important. It becomes secondary, as tends to happen to in sociology and other fields. So definitely it's a focus that we need to start shedding light on.
So, Miss Hopa, you'll be getting that email from me, and your manager as well. You'll be getting that email of planning what we're going to do here, and have you come and join us so we can hear about the narratives and work together to get the message out there to them, not just, in one area, but globally. So you'll be hearing from me.
And I also
Real
want to
soon.
add, I want to add, I said this before, but I don't think sometimes when you're in the eye of the storm, you really can't gauge what's going on around you. But I really truly think this event is history. This is making history. We're going to try to start or be a part of starting a new direction in the academy. And the reason why much is not known about this topic in sociology and other disciplines is because it's not something people study or talk about very often. It's the secret that everyone knows about, which is why I think it has a lot more potential than people give it credit for. So I hope that everyone who's attended this conference, the speakers, as well as the attendees, go forth and carry the seeds of this intellectual endeavor to wherever you are. It's going to happen.
Yes, it's just the beginning. Ms. Hopa, I'd like to say thank you for your time. You've been so graceful, shared wonderful information with everyone, and we definitely look forward to working together, continuing our relationship. This has been a wonderful experience from day one, communicating with your team. And we're honored that you came and you were here, and we had this fireside chat. And I think, as Dr. Hall noted, this is just the beginning. In collaboration and working in unity, there's so much that we can do together. And I look forward to it.
And I would just love to say, "Ngiyaleboha, ngiyabonga, enkosi," all of it means thank you in 3 languages that are part of me. I just want to say really thank you for this conference. Thank you for this conversation, and for us to really just, have a platform where we can actually engage. And when we leave, I think that we are more solution orientated and we're more empowered to see which frameworks we can use to assist, and help our lives. So I really, really, really thank you for inviting me. I'm very honored.
It's been honored, Dr. Hall.
I just provide my humble thinking. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Would anyone like to pose any questions before we end the session? Well, I will keep everyone informed of what we're working on with Ms. Hopa, so that we can all come together in unity and move forward. Because, as I noted earlier, we are all the change that we wish to see in this world. We can make it happen. We just have to work together and keep it moving forward. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hopa and Dr. Hall.
Thank you.
This has been great. Okay, our
Sorry
next
about
session.
the light going off. There's nothing I can do about that. So
I thought you were being cool. I like the look, because I often do that when I'm in meetings. When the light gets too much, I do that. I turn it off, and I'm like, hope you guys know I'm still here. But this has been wonderful, Ms. Hopa. The discussion, their interactions, especially with you and Dr. Hall. This has been like phenomenal. I loved it, and it was so enlightening.
And I actually have to thank you, Dr. Hall, because you were so you also made me pour out a lot into my own mind, because you were, I guess it's your training, you were going into it very much in an investigative way too. And I appreciate the open-mindedness that
Well, I
came
feel
out
like
of
I
it.
owe
But
you tuition for your lecture.
Right? Yes.
But thank you so much, and we'll wait for the recording. And
Yes, I'll send that over to you right away.
Mhm.
Is this the it wouldn't be the last talk. I think there's still
we have one more session, and then we have the closing.
okay.
And I hate for the conference to end, but
Yeah.
Well, all the best with what remains, and congratulations with what you've done so far.
thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right.
Okay, everyone, bye.
All right.